Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning if you're listening in from the US. I am Bart Minton. I'm the program leader of ESSP of the International Food Policy Research Institute in Ethiopia. I am very happy to welcome you to this webinar on improving evidence for better policy making in Ethiopia's livestock sector. This is a joint webinar organized together with the Ethiopian Institute for Agricultural Research and the Policy Studies Institute, together with the Livestock Systems Innovation Lab, under which we have been doing this project. So we have been working on this project for the last 3 years, and so we are happy to present some of the work today. Not all of the work, but some of the highlights of the work that we have done under this program. When we started this program, we were surprised that it had actually very little economic work done on the livestock sector, and this despite its huge importance in Ethiopia and the low consumption of animal-sourced food products and the rapid agri-food system transformations that are happening in Ethiopia. So we were very happy that the Livestock Systems Innovation Lab provided us some resources to do some more in-depth work with them in this area. Well-performing livestock systems matter enormously for incomes of smallholders. For agricultural performance overall, there are strong synergies between livestock and crop production, and for nutritional outcomes. Important research is often done to improve livestock technologies, but while the development of technologies is extremely important, market demand and consumption issues that might inhibit their adoption are frequently ignored. And this is critical, as without right market signals and a proper understanding of these market and consumption issues, efforts to develop an improved supply situation with the right technologies are often not successful. Our research has therefore attempted to build a more complete understanding of the Ethiopian livestock food systems, both in rural and in around urban areas. More specifically in this project, we have tackled two major research teams, and that's a little bit shown in the setup of the webinar as well. One big thing that we looked at is the dairy value chain. So the dairy value chain, milk, extremely important for nutrition, but despite the importance of that dairy value chain, there has been little updated information on how it functions in Ethiopia. And so to improve the evidence in this area, we did a big survey with producers, with rural traders, with urban traders, and with urban retailers, trying to understand how the whole system is functioning. Then the second big theme that we focused on was trying to understand production, markets, and consumption of animal-sourced food products at a national level. And to do so, we have been using large representative nationwide household consumption and price surveys, and we have been relying on the livestock surveys that the Central Statistical Agency has been implementing. And so based on this data, we try to understand the dynamics that are happening in all these domains. This is important as Ethiopia has undergone significant transformations over the last decade, and we wanted to provide nationwide assessments on what exactly we think has been happening in the livestock sector, from production to markets to consumption. Under this project, we have been working very closely with local institutions. We collaborated with researchers in EIAR and PSI. We have also organized a large number of trainings on production economics, GIS, value chain analysis, impact analysis, etc. We have been financing also fellowships, and then we have supervised 2 PhDs at the University of Addis Ababa in the economics department. Moreover, these data sets that we have gathered are also publicly available, and they can be downloaded from IFPRI's webpage for anybody who wants to do further work on it. So that's a public resource that's available for everybody. And all the work that we are presenting today is available in the public domain and can be downloaded from the webpage from IFPRI and ESSP. Our research has been made possible through the funding of the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Livestock Systems that is housed in the Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences in the University of Florida in partnership with the International Livestock Research Institute. This innovation lab is funded by the United States Agency for International Development through a 5-year award, and we are grateful for their support. We are honored to have Professor Gbola Adesogan, professor at the University of Florida and the director of the Livestock Systems Innovation Lab, to make some welcoming remarks. Then Alamayo Seyum Tafesi will moderate the webinar. He is a senior research fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute, and he is also the income program leader of the Ethiopian Strategy Support Program. I hope that we will have a good, informative webinar today with interesting discussions that should improve our knowledge in this area. Thank you.
Before we start, I would like to make 3 announcements. The first is that we have webcam tips about how to follow this webinar in the screen on a slide that would be on your screen shortly. Second, all these sessions will be recorded and will be made available on the web. So please tell us now if you do not want your presentation to be recorded and shared on the web. I will take silence as consent. Third, I would like to encourage everyone to submit their questions and comments in the chat box that you find in the webinar control box. We will pose these questions during the Q&A as much as time allows, and afterwards we'll also give these panelists time to answer these questions online. So now we move to the beginning of the first session, the first part, and our first presenter is Bart Minton. There's no need to introduce Bart, he has been introduced already, and his topic is the rising costs of animal sourced food in Ethiopia. Bart, please.
Okay, thank you, Alamayo. So I'm going to talk about what has been happening with the livestock sector, mostly from the market and from the consumption side, and then I will look at the influence of the prices and income that have been driving a number of these changes. Next slide, please. So we see in general in Ethiopia that we have had an enormous transformation in the last 15 years. These numbers illustrate this a little bit. We have seen rapid poverty reduction. In 2000, we had about 45% of the people that were considered poor. That has quickly come down. In the latest survey, this was just over 20%. We see a rapid decline in stunting, 60% in 2000. This came down to about 40% in 2016. So enormous improvements over these years. However, these stunting levels are still very high. And one of the reasons is that these diets are still too monotonous. Next slide, please. However, we see, can be the earlier one? Yeah, we see, however, that there are improvements happening. If we look at the data of the HISES, the National Household Surveys that are organized by CSA every 5 years, and we look at the share of cereals in expenditures for food expenditures, we see that this share that people are spending on cereals is declining over time. In the year 2000, almost 50% of the food budget was going towards cereals. If you go to 2016, this had declined to 30%. So the non-cereals are becoming a much more important sector, or a much more important source of expenditures for Ethiopian consumers. This is a pattern that you typically see happening in any transforming economy. So people become richer. When they become richer, they start shifting away from spending money directly on cereals. Next slide. When we look in particular at expenditures on the high value and nutritious crops, we see movement happening. So we look here at the case of animal sourced foods and fruits and vegetables. Animal sourced foods in 2000, it was about 8% of the food basket. This had increased by 50% in 2016. Okay, so more than 12% of the food basket is being spent on animal sourced foods. In there, dairy is most important. We also see changes happening with fruits and vegetables, which is obviously a good sign. Fruit and vegetables in the year 2000 was about 4% of the expenditures. This had gone up by 2016 to 9%. So these are all good signs. Okay, that's what we want. We want to have a more diversified diet that is good to address the problem of stunting and malnutrition in the country. Next slide. However, one issue that we have looked at is that part of this increased expenditures to pay for animal sourced foods and for fruit and vegetables is the issue of increased prices. So a big part of that increased expenditures is actually going towards paying for the higher prices of animal sourced foods. The graph here shows to what extent these prices of different foods have been changing over the last, well, it should actually be 2018 compared to 2005. I made a mistake in the title, how it has been changing in the last 13 years. So basically the graph shows that the prices for grains, roots, and tubers in real terms hasn't changed that much. Now, if we look at the prices of the more nutritious products, legumes and nuts, they have been in real terms increasing by 40% over that period. Almost dairy products, they have been increasing by more than 40%. Eggs have been increasing by more than 50%. Flesh foods and other small animals, they have been increasing by 70%. Then if you go to the fruit and vegetables, there also we see quite significant increases, and increases that have been much higher than prices of cereals. On the other hand, we also see that those products that are not good for nutrition, such as oils and fats and sugar and honey, those prices have actually in real term been decreasing. So this picture is very worrisome for those people that want to improve nutrition in the country, right? So those foods that we want to promote, they're becoming much more expensive. Those foods that we want people to eat less of, they're becoming cheaper. Next slide, please. Then we looked also a little bit at who is actually consuming these products that we want more consumption of. Here we have the graph of the consumption of animal sourced foods, and we look at poverty quintiles, the level of consumption by the poor versus the rich. And so we have 5 quintiles. If we look at the poorest quintile, we see that they spend about 7% of their food expenditures on animal-sourced foods. Then we go to the richest quintile, and they spend almost 18% of their food expenditures on animal-sourced foods. So we see a huge difference between the poor and the rich, and that's partly driven by these prices that are relatively high for this animal-sourced foods and by income. So the richer can pay better for the prices of this animal-sourced foods. Next slide. So to better understand this process and what is driving consumption in the country, we have been doing some demand analysis. We try to understand what exactly is the role of these prices and these incomes on the consumption of animal-sourced foods. We have done these demand estimations based on national household surveys. And so we have done simple analysis of price and income elasticities, much used in economics, but very important to understand what is happening in this sector. Okay, so basically, what an elasticity says is if a price is changing with X%, consumption will change with Y%. And so I'm going to present a little bit some estimates that we have done based on these national representatives household surveys. Next slide, please. We see there that these prices, this price elasticities coming out of these models are relatively high. And that is something that we see all over the world. So prices for animal source foods are very price elastic. So basically these numbers indicate if the price of beef would double, the consumption of beef would decline by 73%. If the price of mutton and goat would go up by 100%, the price would decrease by 12%, etc. So what does that mean? That means that we have had high impact of these price changes that we discussed before. So if the price increases that we have seen there would have led to a decrease in in consumption by 25% if everything would have stayed the same. Luckily, there were not only price changes in the country, there have been big income changes. Next slide, please. And these income changes, they lead to higher consumption of animal source food. And these numbers indicate that. So if the income is changing, people will spend significantly more money on beef. If the income is doubling, the expenditures on beef will go up by 46%. If the income is doubling, the expenditure on mutton and goat will increase by 270%. If the incomes double, the expenditures on dairy products will go up by 51%. So income is a major driver for the increased expenditures on animal-sourced foods. Based on these numbers, then we have looked at what the likely impact is going to be of the income growth that we are seeing in Ethiopia, and we try to simulate a little bit what the impact is on the commercial sector. Next slide, please. And so we took some reasonable assumptions on population growth, income growth in the country. And we started from the baseline in 2011, then looked forward to 2030 and tried to understand to what extent this animal-sourced food sector is going to grow. This commercial animal-sourced food, the animal-sourced food sector is going to grow. And we see that with these numbers that we have estimated from this consumption data, we see that the commercial sector is expected to triple. The value of that sector is going to triple over a 20-year period, with especially very high growth seen in the urban sector. Okay, urban sector, urbanization is going to go very fast. There are richer people living in urban areas, so that will lead to a big increase in demand for animal source food products, and that will have huge implications on the commercial sector. So there will be more demands for this distributors, more demands for markets, more demand for wholesalers. And so we need to be prepared for that. That is what the graph shows on the left. Then on the right, we also looked in detail what the composition of that demand will be. And so the numbers there show that we will likely see big increases in mutton and dairy compared to the other segments of the livestock sector. Next slide. So in general, we have seen that Ethiopia has been very successful in the cereal sector and have been able to actually keep the real prices of cereal stable. This has been less the case for nutritious crops and more in particular for the livestock sector. So more attention is needed to these sectors. We want to keep these prices of these products of animal sourced foods, we want to keep them low. They have important nutritional benefits and we don't want to lose that. We also want to put attention on that sector because massive demand changes are coming, and they will lead to large changes in commercial demand especially. And then we have to pay attention to the issue of inclusiveness. We see that especially the poorer people, they still find the prices of these animal sourced foods too expensive, and that's why the consumption for these products are lower for them.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this end of project workshop on the improving evidence for better policy making in Ethiopia's livestock sector. I want to greet each of you and thank you for making time to participate in this very important workshop. We live in a very challenging time with COVID-19 and the disruptions it has caused to the food chain all across the world and even particularly here in Ethiopia. This particular project has been a very instrumental and effective one at gathering a lot of useful data that is influencing the policy process here in Ethiopia. In fact, we consider this project one of our flagship projects. We appreciate the leadership of Bart Minton and IFPRI and the collaboration with our colleagues at EIAR and EDRI and PSI. So thank you for the great work, and I think we will all be very impressed as the different activities and accomplishments of this project are described today. Within the Livestock Lab, like you all, we're all still coping with the COVID challenges. We're still working from home. A lot of our projects in many parts of the world have been disrupted, parts of them have been interrupted, but people are working, people are doing a lot of good work. And in fact, just yesterday, we submitted an application for an extension for another 5 years to USAID. And what we're hearing is that we will very likely be extended for another 5 years. So we look forward to be back in Ethiopia as soon as we can, to seeing all of you, our friends, and to continuing to work with you. We look forward to today, to the opportunity to discuss the results and the important impacts and outcomes this project has had. So thank you very much and have a great time today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Adegbola Adesogun from the University of Florida. And thank you also, Bart, for the presentation. Our next speaker is Tadesse Kuma, a senior researcher at the Policy Studies Institute, and his topic is trade and value chain assessment of live animal exports from Ethiopia. Tadesse, please.
So Good evening, good morning, and also good afternoon, where you are. My name is Taddasa. I'm working for Policy Studies Institute, which is a policy think tank in Ethiopia. So this is my title of presentation, which is include contribution of my colleagues. It's trade value chain assessment on live animal export from Ethiopia. Next slide, please. Regarding the livestock export, in general, as expressed by Bart as the early introductory session, livestock sector has important place in the Ethiopian economy. Its contribution is high for total national income from 12 to 16%, as well as it's highly important for agricultural sector GDP. It accounts about 30%. In the lowland areas, its importance is much higher even. Livestock sector is principal source of subsistence, as well as its important earning source for national export earning. Historically, it stands as second level, but in the recent years, it's somehow declined. The worrisome now recent years is its earning from livestock sector is declining. For instance, it declined from 400 million USD in 2011 to something like 252 million in 2018, which is about 36% drop. When we come to live animal export, which is a specific interest of this research, it's also substantially declined from 207 million in 2011 to 45 million in 2018. Even if we consider the recent one, which is 1920, it's about 36 million. So it's about 5-fold decline or drop in total earning, which is on average 17% drop per year. So the purpose of this study is to understand reasons why this drop is happening, and as well as what's the implication of this on smallholder income. Please, next. So this shows the same history. As you can see, the two commodities are the meat export and the live animal are the same, but the live animal export dropped substantially. So when we come to data and method, we highly depend on secondary data sources, which are already indicated there. And also we have made primary source data gathering through consultative meetings. Also, we traveled throughout Ethiopia to see some of quarantine centers, how they are operational, and the extent of quality of services they provide. Regarding method, we have mainly depend on descriptive statistics and also map-up or FAOS approach. This approach, just to explain you briefly, FAOS methodology is mainly compile all the costs from farm gate to wholesale market, all administrative and as well as different costs. As well, it compiles from wholesale market to port, and then analyze what are the major underlying cost components and administrative aspects. Next, please. Okay. So I hope regarding my presentation, the major issue, because this is a slightly long value chain analysis, so I will focus on key obstacles, major factors which accounts for the stated price drop, which we have seen at the very beginning, as I stated. So the first one is issue of quarantine. Despite of having and being the first in Africa and the 10th or 5th in the world, Ethiopia has no standardized quarantine service which certifies and accredited and certifies for international market. As a result, we depend on quarantine services in the Djibouti. So the problem here is that governance of quarantine in Djibouti is really the major aspects. Some of the issues in this area are quarantine governance in Djibouti in the hands of one person. Sometimes it's not really required, but it's official. So Mr. Abu Yasser is a person. He's somehow hired the quarantine from Djibouti government, and handles all the processes, who seemingly manages at his own will. The second one is excessive cost of quarantine services. For instance, they charge USD2 per shots and US7 to 8 for cattle per night. The other one is lack of transparency. Rejection of live cattle from Ethiopia without detection of sufficient defects or diseases. That is usually happens as we have covered through comprehensive assessment. The other second one is the efforts of the government, which is made to put in place quarantine service, not succeeded. Over the last 2 decades, there has been effort since 2000 to construct about 5 export quarantine centers in Mille, Jijjiga, Matamma, Humara, Al-Mahal for 230 million. But if you see the current status, none of them are functional. Could you move to the second? The second one is excessive. The third one is excessive cost, which I have indicated earlier because of inefficiency in the system. Exporters has to pass several requirements, which are really affecting the official export line and move to the informal export. Because of excessive costs, traders are really suffered and move to the other alternative, which is really not preferable, but a second option. The large number of traders move to the second option, which is informal market. For instance, during our survey, we managed to see out of 87 feedlots, which are operational before, like 2015-14, but only less than 10 are operational nowadays. And we come to realize that some of the traders who used to work on the official market moved to informal market. And that is caused booming informal trade. So informal trade historically has been there. It accounts from 75 to 80% of total export earning. So the official has been thin for years, but it's further declined. And some of the major reasons why unofficial or informal trade is booming, there are some important issues. One is excessive cost and inefficiency of export requirements. Invisible hands of politicians sometimes, which is not really easy to track, but large number of informal influences of engagement of big or heavy politicians, which are untouchable and powerful. That is obtained from, reliable sources. High foreign exchange demand versus supply. So traders or business personnel facing severe shortage of foreign exchange. So as alternative paths, they buy cattle and then export and then gain foreign exchange access. The other one is lack of access to market infrastructure and in the close proximity to the border communities. Most of the lowland communities have really not really easily access the market infrastructure. So the best option for them is joining the informal market, which is at close proximity to them. The other one is price difference. Usually, informal prices are much higher compared to the formal one. So as any business, as any decision maker, they prefer to sell in the informal market. The other one is historical, economic, and social attachment of border community is another factor, because sometimes they sell their cattle, buy their livelihood, food, whatever they need. The other one is coordination issue between the federal, regional, and different layers of government system, which is really not in a way due to most recent political unrest and several related issues. Could you move to the next slide, please? Okay. Now, on the basis of background, which I have stated you earlier, some of the findings results indicate the earlier facts. For instance, the first graph shows access cost which usually we call transaction costs, of feedlot operators. These feedlot operators are most important value chain actors. They buy cattle from farmer or from primary market, keep the cattle for 2 to 3 months in the feedlot, and then fatten to the standard level and sell. So the major cost, as you can see, that is a cost breakdown which the operators pay. So the major cost, meaning about 60% of total cost breakdown, accounts for feed costs. And the second graph shows the other fact. The second graph shows the skyrocketing price of feed over time. On average, since 2002, the feed price has increased in Ethiopia by 7-fold, from like less than 1 birr to 8 birr. So this is major obstacle behind the live cattle exports. Could you move to the next slide, please? Okay, this is another cost. The earlier cost is for feedlot operators, but the second cost is, this cost is for exporters. So exporters also face considerable costs, mainly taxes and levies, which account for more than 30%, and then followed by handling costs. In general, if you see the circle graph, you have two aspects: inefficiencies, which shows average composition of market.
I apologize. Would you please wrap up now? We have.
Okay. Could you move to the last slide, please? Then last slide. The major issue here is, the major aspect from this one is booming informal trade, which is really contributing for major obstacle, and high domestic demand for meat together with skyrocketing access costs, which made the Ethiopian cattle export uncompetitive in the international world. And high demand for foreign exchange is another aspect. As a result, exporters offer generous high prices at wholesale market, which is even higher compared to the FOB prices, and which is also transmitted to the producers. So producers are earning slightly higher, as well as wholesalers are earning higher prices, but exporters are making losses. So what are the possible way out for this? I have few issues just to mention. This may not be magic bullet, but improving institutional arrangement will be the most important one. Strengthening quarantine services for live cattle export. Despite having large cattle resources, Ethiopia has no standard quarantine service. The revisiting causes for current foreign exchange misalignment seems to be the major one. It's not only the shortage, but there are complicated factors behind. Cross-border live animal trade also based on historical, economic, social ties between broader communities. So simple forceful measures doesn't work. So maybe it's important to understand the facts in a more economic way rather than forceful actions. The last and the most important one is feed access. Availability and quality has an important implication for future development of live animal and live cattle export in general. So this is all I have. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Taddese. The next presentation is by Myrta Arage, who is a research fellow at IFPRI, and the title of his talk is Alternative National Development Scenarios and Their Implications for the Livestock System in Ethiopia. Taddese, would you turn off your webcam, please? Myrta, please.
Yeah, thank you, Alamayo. Thank you, Alamayo. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My presentation today is gonna be on alternative national development scenarios and their potential implications for livestock system development in Ethiopia. And this is a joint work by myself, James Tarlos, Nishao, and Ermias. Next slide, please. So IFPRI research, and of course research by many others, show that for the last couple of years there has been a rapid increase in demand for animal source food, and a couple of reasons have been indicated as driving changes for this, including income growth, urbanization, together with changing consumers' preference towards animal source food. In line with that, the Livestock Master Plan of Ethiopia lays a very ambitious and sizable investment plan, which is largely driven by high projected demand growth for the period from 2015 to 2020 and beyond. And this can be indicated by the figure on the right-hand side of my slide, which is extracted out of the Livestock Master Plan in the livestock sector analysis document, which is behind the master plan, indicating that the future forecast or projection of meat, milk, and egg production and consumption is expected to be increasing alarmingly, with a rate of more than 10% or even close to 35% per year. On the other hand, it seems that income growth is slowing down the last few years compared to the 10% which has been used when the Livestock Master Plan was built for scenario construction against IMF's recent forecast of about 6.5%. And recently there is this COVID pandemic, and of course probably other risks could further push down the growth forecasts for the coming few years. And the implication of all this is gonna be that the Livestock Master Plan may not be anymore that much appropriate for the new economic trajectory the country finds itself in. Next slide, please. So as a solution for this, we are assuming that, so for national planning and identifying investment requirements, it might be relevant to reassess the projections and the policy priorities that has been set. And towards this end, we hope it's important to develop a more sophisticated integration of the economic system jointly with a traditional herd dynamics model. And this integrated modeling framework could take the form you see on the right-hand side of this slide, this integrated framework, where there is information flow between the herd dynamics model, the core economic model, which is a CGE model, and of course a micro simulation model, which will help us to assess changing poverty and dietary diversity. And the information flows could be in terms of herd size, feed requirements, feed demand as a drive demand from the herd dynamics model, and from the economic model information, including prices, consumer demand, and so on. And this tool that we developed, we hope allows us to quantify in a more consistent way the linkages the economic growth has on agri-food transformation, as well as will help us to develop a trajectory of the livestock system in Ethiopia. Next slide, please. So more on the herd dynamics model, which is one component of the integrated system that we have developed, and is here. And the schematic representation of the dynamics model is presented, which has some features as tracking herd size disaggregated by age and sex and animal type. And for this illustration purpose, we have cattle as a case, where we explicitly represent female, male, and then each of these across, at least in this picture, subdividing them into 4 major age classes. But in the model that we built, we have a 13 single-year age classes. But in any case, this herd dynamics model that we built utilizes baseline stock data, indicative days and birth rates, uptake rates, and so on. And then it spits out system consistent birth rates, death rates, uptake rates, milk and meat production to list a few. But to be able to use this hair dynamics model that we built, we need some data, and the nature of the data that we obtained focusing on cattle is that as a source of data, we have used the livestock module of the Ethiopian Agricultural Sample Survey, which runs from 2003 to 2017. And although we focus on cattle here, we have also collected information on small ruminants and poultry as well. And this survey reports cattle by 5 major age classes, 0 to 6 months, 6 months to 1 year, and so on, and irregular 5 broader age classes. This will pose a problem for our modeling, as I will be touching it later on, and we'll have a way out to that. Using this survey, we are able to build a cattle database for 5 agro-ecological zones in Ethiopia, classified by major economic activity, such as cereal-based or insect-based, and then by moisture availability too. Next slide, please. So thank you. The next milestone in terms of using this model is linking the hair dynamics model to the economic model. And as I said, the original data that we have collected from the survey was not readily usable, obviously. So we have to pass through a lot of data transformations. And one of the reasons, as I just touched, is that we wanted to build a certain single year age class cattle database from the 5 class cattle data that we've got from the survey. And to do that, we had to transform the data to create a system consistent, smooth, demographically consistent life table. And once we do that, and once we are able to generate internally consistent demographic parameters, we had to export that to the GAMS-based hair dynamics model. And some of the data that we exported to the hair dynamics model is smooth database, baseline stock data, representing 2016-17, and that's because our economic model that we use in the CG model is founded upon a 2017 Ethiopian social accounting metrics. And we also pass on fertility rates, death rates, and uptake rates to the hair dynamics model. And these two, so I'm focusing on the first 2 components of the integrated model, the hair dynamics model and the core CG model. And there is that interaction between these two, and the interaction is bidirectional. For example, we pass information on feed demand, livestock capital that's gonna be used in meat and milk production activities from the hair dynamics model to the CG model. And on the other hand, the CG model also pass on information related to activity prices, which determine meat and milk offtake rates, and of course, input availability, which could also determine live weights of animals and milk productivity. Next slide, please. Okay, great. So these are the simulations that we run, and we run a total number of 5 simulations, but one is a baseline against which we compare our 4 future economic demographic scenarios. And as I said, the core CG model is based on a 2017 social accounting metrics for Ethiopia, which includes about 80 activities, of which about 8 are livestock related, primary and processed products or activities. And the baseline scenario had this feature that we take the recent IMF's forecast of 6.5% GDP growth as a benchmark over the coming 10-15 years, together with the current pace of urbanization of about 5 percentage points higher than the current by 2030. While this is the baseline, so our 4 future economic demographic scenarios are differentiated through the rate of economic growth assumption that we use. So we have 2 extreme in Ethiopia's, given Ethiopia's current experience or recent past growth experience, we assume a slow growth rate of 4 and a very fast growth rate of, let's say, maintaining the past nearing to 9% per year for the coming many years, and that's the fast growth rate trajectory. And
Marta, you are running out of time, please.
All right, okay.
Can you go to the results, please?
Couple of slides. So these are the scenarios that we ruled, and they are all hypothetical. Next slide, please. So they are going to give us an indication of how we need to assessment the future trajectory of the livestock sector. And my results that I'm going to present are in comparison to, as I said, the baseline scenario. And in terms of results from the economic model, what we have found out is that the demand for animal source food heavily depends on economic demographic change, obviously, and of course income growth appears to be the main driver, as you see from the both of these figures, especially if you look at the black and the let's say yellow or orange one. They are all related to fast growth rate trajectory, irrespective of whether we are assuming slow or fast urbanization trajectory. So we see that income growth has a very positive impact on overall livestock system expansion, and urbanization seems to have a stronger impact on processed animal source food items. And this is true for the production and consumption side of economic outcomes. Next slide, which is gonna be talking about how consistent results from the herd dynamics model are with the economic model, and actually, since they are really linked through those variables that I indicated, what we find out that are that results are really consistent, and we've seen that high economic growth is linked to high meat and milk offtake. So that there's that positive impact on milk and meat offtake, but urbanization seems to have, while it has a clearer impact on meat offtake, but we were not able to see, that clear impact of higher urbanization on milk offtake, as you see from the orange of the reddish figure on the right-hand side. So that you don't see that significant difference between slow or fast urbanization scenarios. And that's almost it. But let me wind up my presentation with a couple of conclusions on my next slide. All right, so what we have learned from this exercise is that the demand for animal source food depends on income and urbanization, and income is the main driver of overall livestock system expansion, while urbanization seems to be shifting the composition of animal source food consumption towards the processed ones. We also learned that livestock development plans should reflect economic reality, so by taking into account recent developments and of course risks as well, and this suggests that probably the existing livestock master plan might have to be revisited. And the other learning area is that integrating economy-wide and livestock systems could be relevant to further strengthen economic planning. And I must say that the IFPRI component of the modeling work is going to continue until the end of August, and we are hoping to refine this result, as well as share with you a couple of results on evaluating drought damage, and of course milk value chain analysis using CG model framework. And that's my presentation for today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Marta. We quickly move to our last presentation in this session, and that is by Fantu Bachewe, who is a research coordinator at the Ethiopian Research Support Program of IFPRI, and his topic is Ethiopia's evolving livestock sector. Fantu, please. You are muted, Fantu. You are muted.
Okay, sorry. It's unmuted. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. This is a work together with Bart Minton, Fanait Addesa, and Alamayo Siyum Tafasa. Next slide, please. The work studies livestock production, productivity, and input use in Ethiopia during 2004 and 14-15. This is a period that's marked with rapid economic growth in Ethiopia, whereby the GDP grew in double digits and per capita GDP by over 8% per year. Sorry. Agriculture contributed the largest share to GDP and account until it was taken over by services in 2011 and accounted for over 30% out of every 100 bird that was added to the economy. And within agriculture, crop is most important and increased in importance during the period. However, when we look at the livestock subsector, its importance in agriculture declined throughout of the period and accounted for only 5 out of every 100 bird that was added to the economy. Next slide, please. However, there are signs that show that the great potential in livestock subsector, both demand and supply side factors. The country is home to largest stocks of many livestock types. The country in 2015 had around 58 million cattle, which is larger than the number in Australia and Argentina, important beef producing countries. And the cattle stock grew at about 4% during the period, which was the lowest growth relative to other livestock types. And the country is home to largest stocks of other livestock species as well. And cattle are owned by almost 82% of farm households in rural areas, and a large proportion of farm households in rural areas also own other livestock types, indicating that improvements in productivity adopted by the critical mass of the farmers would lead to a considerable increase in animal source food production in the country. In the demand side, the spending on animal source food production has increased during the period. And when we compare trends in livestock exports, both live animals and meat exports, they have grown during the period. And further increase in livestock spending is expected as income grows. Next slide, please. When we see production and productivity from several angles, we measure it in different ways. One of the ways is the quantity of animals that are destined for slaughter, meat production. We saw it doubled in cattle, more than doubled in goats, and grew by about 60% in sheep during the period. However, the rate of net commercial offtake, or the number of cattle that are destined for slaughters, is low in terms of proportion. Next slide. Animal sourced food production, mainly milk and egg production, has increased. Egg output increased by 93% and milk output by 41% during the period. However, productivity can be best described as stagnated. It even declined. And when we see the productivity, milk productivity, we find that milk productivity averaged at 300 liters per year per cow, which is less than 1 liter per day. And similarly, egg production at about 4.5 dozens per chicken, which is like 1 egg per week. That's the milk productivity in Ethiopia relative to all other East African countries is lower, considerably lower. Next slide, please. We also measure the productivity of livestock sector in terms of the animals involved and the farmers involved in the subsector. We see that real livestock outputs increased by 73% during the period. That is, in terms of output per TLU, tropical livestock units, which normalize all livestock in camel terms, has increased by 11%, and real output per farmer increased by 15%. This respectively is 1 and 1.3% growth in an average year during the period. We also do a growth accounting analysis for the subsector, which decomposes the growth in real livestock output in terms of different inputs used in the subsector, and we find that about 3/4 of the increase in livestock output came from increase in livestock owners, which we use as proxy for labor, and in number of livestock. That is 75% of the growth came from increase in numbers, just increase per heads. Modern inputs like improved feed, extension, vaccination, veterinary services use accounted for about 11% to the growth in output, livestock output recurred during the period. More importantly, the TFP, total factor productivity, accounted for only 1% of the growth in livestock output, meaning that there has been almost no change in methods of livestock production during the period. Next slide, please. We also use the input use patterns and trends. We also study, the input use patterns and trends in the livestock subsector. And we see that green fodder or grazing accounted for the largest proportion of animal feed used during the period. And however, we see a considerable, growth in the proportion of households that are using grazing as an important source of livestock feed. There is a lower share in the use of improved feed, but the share doubled during the period, and particularly purchased input used has increased. Purchased improved feed use has increased in importance during the period. We see livestock extension use in the livestock sector is very small, and has been like campaign-like. It increases in some years and declines in other years. And relative to the use of extension services in the crop sector that was observed.
Could you wrap up, please? Huh?
Yeah, okay. During the period, it has been very minimal. We see an increased use of veterinary services, treatment of sick livestock. The growth is tremendous in those sectors. We also see a negative relationship between vaccination and disease out of disease. Next slide, please. We also see an increase in the use of artificial insemination. Next slide, sorry. But the number of calves born is like 2% out of artificial inseminated cows is less than 2% out of the total calves born. There has been a considerable increase in dairy processing and livestock breed composition during the period. We also conduct, next slide please, an econometric analysis of the factors that determine that are associated with use of improved inputs, and find that education and household size, herd size are positively associated with adoption of vaccination, improved feeds, and proportion of improved breeds used by the farmers. Adoption of all inputs are positively associated, importantly, with extension advice. Distance to urban centers is a good associate of adopting improved inputs. Next slide, please. So to summarize what we have found in this study, there has been rapid growth in the number of livestock and livestock owners. Growth has been 50% or higher during the period in every aspect. However, we see livestock's contribution being very low or small to GDP and to agriculture. However, demand and supply factors imply considerable potential for the subsector. Number sold for meat production increased considerably. Milk and egg output grew considerably, but productivity stagnant. Labor and livestock accounted for the 3/4 of the output growth in the livestock subsector. Improved feed and purchased feed are growing in importance, but the share is still low. Crossbred cows as well as poultry are growing in importance. The number of farmers using extension in livestock is low and didn't change much during the period. Vaccination and treatment increased considerably. However, the share that are diseased overall declined. Death rates declined slightly, but there are still considerable deaths in livestock, such that the deaths in livestock, every species of livestock, is more than twice the number that are sold for meat production. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fantu. We are now completed the 4 presentations, and expect all the 4 presenters to appear to respond to questions forwarded by participants during this session. I will start with Bart, and the first question for Bart is, what are the reasons for the price increases that we see for animal sourced foods? Bart, please.
Yes, so so it's a worrisome phenomenon that these prices are going up. So Fantu and I have been looking in a paper, trying to understand a little bit what is driving these price increases, and it seems that there are 2 major factors actually pushing these prices. First, there is the rapid urbanization. So there are more people living in urban centers, and these people have more income, so that is leading to a rapid change in demand, and so the supply is not keeping up with that rapid demand change. And then the second issue, so that is driving especially the prices for these products that are perishable, like eggs and liquid milk. And then the second thing is that the international prices, they have been changing very quickly, right? So the beef prices have been increasing rapidly internationally, and so Ethiopia is in a big way connected to this market, so that is pushing up the local prices as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Bart. The next question goes to Myrta, and the question is, how easy is it to adapt this approach to study other livestock systems different from cattle? Myrta.
Okay, thank you for this question. Yeah, it's good that this question has been raised, and as I tried to touch it in my presentation as well, although we focus on cattle for this specific case study, we are also hoping to do that for small ruminants, and we have collected information on that from the exact same survey data. And it's really possible to do that. And the only challenge that this might pose is that although we built this herd dynamics model using a single 1 year time dimension to make it consistent with the CG model, which is based on annual data as well, it's also possible to build the same data, or the same model, or adapt that to small ruminants. And the only thing probably we need to do is to include more frequent time horizons, like rather than having this annual time span, monthly time span could work. And there are some other attempts which we borrow from as well, and it's typically possible to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have the next question for Taddese. Thank you, Taddese, for your brief presentation. I have a question to you. What do you suggest for the government and other development practitioners in Ethiopia to have year-round quality and quantity of livestock feed? Ishambal Chakko. Taddese. Unmute, Taddese, unmute, please. Still muted, huh?
How about now? You hear me? I'm unmuted.
I can hear you now, yes.
Okay. So livestock feed is really a critical challenge for livestock sector growth. There are multiple issues behind. The most important factor, it has remained traditional production system. Livestock feed is really a very good, lucrative business area for private sector to be engaged, because the prices are really equal to the food prices. If you take 100 kilo of maize and 100 kilo of average animal feed, it's almost equal. It's around 1,000. So maybe the policy issue should focus on promoting private sector engagement in modern livestock feed production, which is mainly affected by access to land. Land is very important aspect. There has been effort, but not worked well. So maybe one area is that one. The second area is the private sector cannot supply for all livestock owners modern feed. So promoting modern feeds at farm smallholder level as well. I'm now 50 years old, but not 50, it's 55. I know 40 years behind. I know 40 years back, there has been effort to promote modern feed at smallholder yard, backyard, but it not worked well. So maybe the second area of interest should be focusing on promoting modern, nutritious feeds at farm smallholder level is there. AGP, the Agricultural Growth Program, has been doing some good practices, but not as such breakthrough. So these are the two most important issues which I'm feeling to be improved.
Thank you very much, Taddese. The last question is for Fantu. Has the calculations for the contribution of livestock for gross considered draft power. Fanto.
Pardon me, the calculations in the gross accounting?
That's my understanding. I just read the question, but my understanding is in the gross accounting, yes.
It wasn't included in there, but the value of output itself considers it's a part of the GDP national accounts analysis. It considers the contribution of livestock in there. So the number of livestock will take into account this contribution as an input. In the output side, the value of output would take care of that service.
Okay, thank you very much. I think so. So unfortunately, we ran out of time. Actually, we have we have actually more time than allotted for us for this session. So what we'll do is we have collected all your questions. We'll pass them on to the panelists and they will provide answers, and then we will post those answers online. So with that, I would like to thank all four presenters on your behalf, and we now break for a health break for 5 minutes. Thank you very much. We'll see you in 5 minutes.
Thank you.
I believe we should start. So we now move to the second part of this webinar. It has 6 presentations, and I would like to emphasize that the presentations cover Uganda, Ethiopia, and also Uganda. And the inclusion of the Uganda story here is aimed at distilling some lessons for the improvement of the Ethiopian livestock sector. The Uganda livestock sector has recorded significant successes, as we'll hear with the 2 presentations, and there are a lot of lessons that Ethiopia appropriately may learn from. So going to the presentations, the first one is by Seneshao Tamuru, who currently is a country economist for the International Growth Center in Ethiopia, and his topic is transformation in the dairy sector. Seneshao. Unmute, Seneshao, please.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Seneshao, as Dr. Alamayo said. I'm going to talk on transformation in the dairy sector. This is a joint work with Bart Minton, Etumor Kapte, and Agaje Tesfaye. Next slide, please. And transformation in Ethiopia has been well documented in a number of sectors. With major drivers being GDP growth. Ethiopia has been growing double-digit over the last couple of decades, rapid urbanization and massive infrastructure over the last decade or so. But little is known about the transformation in the dairy sector, mainly due to lack of data. So we try to fill this gap based on secondary data sets and also the unique primary survey that we undertook in January to February 2018. Next slide. That covers the major dairy producing areas in and around Addis Ababa, and that's applied to Addis Ababa. And we categorize this into 3 strata. The first strata is Addis Ababa itself, what we call urban area. The second strata is the suburban areas. The third one is what we called rural areas that covered the most important dairy producing zones that supply Addis Ababa in the form of North and West Showa. In Addis Ababa, we covered about 97 dairy farms. In suburban areas, so-called special zones that surround Addis Ababa, we interviewed about 256 farms. In rural areas, we interviewed about 602 dairy farms and farmers. The rural areas were further stratified into 4 quartiles. The first quartile is based on their proximity to Addis Ababa. Q1 is the first quartile is the closest, and Q4 or the fourth quartile is the furthest. Next slide. So what we do is we try to understand if there is indeed transformation in the dairy sector, and if that transformation is inclusive. By inclusive, we mean we analyze remote versus non-remote farmers. By remote, we mean those that are closer to Addis Ababa, and also across farm sizes. We categorize farms into small, medium, and large. The smaller ones are farms with 1 to 2 cows in milk. The medium ones are 3 to 24 cows in milk, and the large dairy farms are those farms with more than 24 or 25 cows in milk. Next slide. So what we do is, even though we we covered the major stakeholders across the dairy value chain between those producing areas in Addis Ababa. For this presentation, I'm going to focus more on the actions in the upstream at the farmers level. Next slide. So what we do is we show you the changes in yield over time across space and over farm sizes, and we try to justify, show you some of the factors behind the change, if there is a change behind the changes, some of the factors that are important. Next slide. So first, what we do is we look at the variation in yield across space as measured by remoteness. For a proxy for remoteness, we used transport cost to Addis Ababa. 0 is Addis Ababa, and the larger transport cost, the further away a given farm is from Addis Ababa. So the figure on the left shows, the vertical axis shows yield as measured by liter per year per cow, and the horizontal axis is the remoteness proxy, that is the transport cost per person. Here we have two lines, blue line and red line. Blue line is the scenario, shows the scenario at the time of the survey. The red one shows the scenario 10 years earlier. We can take 2 points from this. One, changes over time. Comparing the blue lines and the red lines, we can see that yield has increased over time, particularly so for the closer farmers, even though the yield has come down for the most remote farmers. And the second point is yield varies across space. While the farmers in and around Addis Ababa get about 900 or so liters per cow per year, the most remote farmers get as little as 200 liters per cow per year. That shows that the closest farmers get more or less fivefold as those in the more remote areas. We also saw the variation over size, comparing the smaller and bigger ones. The bigger farms get considerable yield, while the smaller farms get about 400 or 300 liters per year per cow. The bigger ones get as much as 5,000 liters per year per cow, and there is considerable variation across farm sizes, and this has changed the yield. There is also substantial change in yield for the bigger farmers, while the yield of the smaller farmers is stagnated. Next slide. What explains this variation in yield? We try to quickly show you some of the major factors that we believe are behind this variation. The first one is access to extension services. The vertical axis of the figure on the left shows access to farmers that stated they have access to extension workers. At the time of the survey, about 60% of the farmers that are closer to Addis Ababa stated to have access to this service, while this access sharply declines as we move further away from Addis Ababa, and there is quite a change over time as we compare the scenario at the time of the survey with 10 years earlier. There is also considerable variation across farm sizes. The bigger the farm sizes, the better access to extension services, and there is also improvement over time, comparing the blue bar and red bar. The blue bar in this and subsequent slides shows the scenario at the time of the survey. The red bars show the scenario 10 years earlier. The other factor could be the share of crossbreed cows. Comparing crossbreed cows and local cows, there is considerable yield variation. The crossbreed cows give significantly larger yield, and the vertical axis shows share of crossbreed cows in total cows. And you can see that while the closest farmers to Addis Ababa, 30% of their cows are crossbreeds, This comes to nearly close to zero for the most remote farms, and there is also improvement. The share of crossbreed cows improved over time, particularly for the closest farmers. Considerable variation across farms, farm sizes. While the share of crossbreed cows is about 25 to 30% for the smaller farms, the bigger farmers almost exclusively rely on crossbreed cows. So quite a change across farm sizes and substantial improvement over time. The other next slide, sorry. And the other possible explanation, this is the scenario I just mentioned about crossbreed cows. Next slide. The other potential explanatory factor could be feed, purchased feeds in the form of premixed feeds or feed blood. Here we look at the share of farmers stated to have purchased wheat bran, the vertical axis. The blue line is the scenario at the time of the survey. We can see that while 50% of the farmers stated to have purchased wheat bran, as we go further away from Addis Ababa to the most remote areas, none of the farmers, almost this figure drops to zero. And quite a variation. There is also more and more farmers stated to have purchased wheat bran at the time of the survey as compared to the scenario 10 years earlier. Comparing across farm sizes, we can see that bigger farmers tend to rely on purchased feeds in the form of wheat bran with stall feeding, where about close to 80% of the bigger farmers stated to have purchased wheat bran, while this proportion comes to closer to about 30% for the smaller farms. But for all farm sizes, there is improvement over time that more and more farmers nowadays stated to have purchased wheat bran. This could be due to the fact that less and less grazing land is available nowadays. Next slide. The other potential factor behind yield variation, both across space and also across farm sizes, could be access to animal health clinics and also animal pharmacies. These two graphs shows travel time required to get to the nearest clinic or nearest pharmacy. We can see from the figure on the left that travel time required to get to the nearest clinic has come down, and it is required, the given farmer who's located in and around Addis Ababa probably required to travel up to 40 minutes to get to the nearest pharmacy, while the most remote farmer is probably required to travel double the amount required by the nearest farmer, and there is improvement over time. Comparing the scenarios across farm sizes, while the bigger farmers are required to travel less, probably they are located in and around Addis Ababa or in urban centers. The smaller farmers are still required to travel further, even though there is improvement over time for all the farm sites. So next slide. In conclusion, we've seen that significant changes in the dairy sector in Ethiopia, transformation. There seems to be positive news. There is a positive change, but we understand that it is from a low base. Our yield, our productivity, Ethiopia's livestock or dairy productivity is still one of the lowest, even in East African standards. So more efforts are needed to further simulate the dynamics. We saw that increasing importance of purchased feeds as less and less availability of grazing lands. We've seen the role of market access. Farmers who have access to better connectivity to roads or urban centers tend to get significantly larger yields as compared to farmers who are located in more remote areas. We've seen that the small and more remote farms are not benefiting from this transformation, and they are not included. So more effort is required to include the smaller and more remote farmers. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Sanisha. We quickly move to the next one by Bart Minton, and the focus now is fasting, food, and farmers, the case of dairy in Ethiopia. Bart, please.
Okay, thank you, Alamayo. So I'm going to talk about the issue of fasting, which is a big thing in Ethiopia. This is joint work with Eline Dane and Senne van de Velde, 2 PhD students in Belgium. Next slide, please. Okay, so we are looking here at the role of religion in shaping food choices, nutrition, and food value chains. It's still not well understood. And so Ethiopia is a particular case. So we have in Ethiopia a large group of Orthodox Christians. They have, over the year, they have different fasting periods where there is abstinence from animal-sourced foods. In Ethiopia also we see low overall consumption of milk in the country, especially by children, and we have an underdevelopment of the dairy sector. So in general, this sometimes is linked with the difficulty of fasting. So it's very hard to develop a sector with these fasting periods. And so we try to understand a little bit what the implications are of fasting on a number of factors. Next slide, please. So we're focusing on 3 research questions in this analysis. First, we want to understand what is the effective number of fasting days that Orthodox Christians actually adhere to. And so we use some original primary data to get at that. We look at how these milk-producing households and markets cope with these cycles of religious fasting. And then we look at what the impact is of fasting on children's milk consumption. Next slide. The data that we are using is basically the data that Sanisha has been describing earlier. In that data set, we have milk production and output data that are recorded over a 1-month recall period. Then we also have consumption data for a 1-week period and a 1-day recall period. Now, luckily for this type of analysis that we do here, this timing of the data collection is good to evaluate the influence of fasting. When you look at the table below, so the survey was done at the end of January until the end of February. So we have some periods when we have weekly fasts. We have the beginning of the Lent fast. So we have a good overlap of areas where there's a lot of fasting happening and not a lot of fasting happening. So we can compare these different periods to have an overview of what's happening with respect to fasting. Next slide. First, we had detailed data on the people that are participating in fasting. So we asked for every household member in our survey, we asked if they were participating in fasting, yes or no, and which type of fast they were participating in. In the case of young children, 5 to 6 years old, about 5% of these children are participating in fasting. And when children get older, 7 to 9 years, this is becoming more prevalent. 23% of these children are already participating in fasting. Then adolescents, 65% basically is participating in any fasting. Adults, 88% of the Orthodox Christians are participating in fasting, and adults, elderly is even more. If we look at the adults in particularly, and so we have all the details on the number of periods they participate in the fasting. Then we sum it all up. We estimate that there are about 140 days of fasting on average for adults. Then we try to see, looking at this number of days, looking at the importance of the Orthodox Christians in Ethiopia, we multiply that to some back of the envelope calculation. So that gets us to a number that the fasting reduces the annual dairy consumption at the national level by 12%. Basically indicating that the fasting alone is not the major explanation for low dairy consumption. So there are other things going on. 12% is not that high a number. Next slide, please. Now, this is a scary slide, but it helps actually to explain a little bit what is happening in this sector. So let's first look at the black lines. We have the supply of dairy products in the non-fasting period, the SNF, the line that is going from the bottom left to the right corner up. And then we have the demand for dairy products in the non-fasting period. So we have a specific price and a specific quantity that is associated with that, PNF and QNF. During the fasting period, the demand for dairy products is declining, so we get a shift in our demand curve to the left. If there was nothing else going on, the prices of dairy products would decline and the quantity consumed would obviously decline. An important insight, because this means that these price declines are good for the consumption of those people that do not fast. We also see that if these prices are becoming lower, supply is going to respond as well. And so this means that the production will go down if that is possible. And we see that happening actually, right? So people can adjust these lactation periods a little bit, and that's what they do. And then the third thing that we see happening is in the liquid milk market, especially, we see this the advantage that you can convert liquid milk to a storable product. And so that's a little bit the red line that we see. So we see a shift to the left. So there is less milk coming on the market. This means that the price of milk will not be as much affected as maybe other sectors. Now, this means in the butter market that we get extra supply of butter during the fasting period. The demand is declining, meaning that these price swings will be bigger for these storable products, for the butter market than for the liquid milk sector. So complicated diagram, but it basically explains all the results that we're getting out of the empirical work. Next slide. So we looked at the data and we tried to understand what dairy farmers are doing to deal with the fasting. So some of them, they reduce milk output at the farm by aligning the number of cows in milk during the fasting period. This is especially done by the most remote farmers. They increasingly channel surplus milk to their children. We see that especially happening for the non-remote areas, and they expand home processing activities. So there's more conversion of milk to butter and cheese. Next slide. When we look at the price behavior, we put here on the left side, we see the prices of milk in the year before the survey. On the right, we see the prices of butter. We have 7 periods of prices that we see: the Lent, the Easter, the period from Easter to May, June to the Advent period, Christmas, and Christmas until the period of the survey. So the big fasting periods are the Lent period and the Advent period, number 1 and 5. So we see in the case of milk that there is no big drop there. This is general inflation a little bit, that the price is lower in the case of 1. In the case of butter, we see for number 5 have a significant decline in these prices. So these prices during the fasting periods, they seriously drop, and then they go up afterwards again. Next slide. If we look at the consumption, so the consumption of dairy products at the household level is reduced, but in general we see higher milk consumption by children during fasting. We see a little bit of a differential effect of remoteness, and in accessible areas we see that this consumption of children increases by 1 liter a week. In the non-fasting period, we have a consumption of 2 liters. During the fasting period, it is significantly increasing by 1 liter. So at that point, they consume 3 liters of milk. Next slide. So what are the implications of these findings? The fact that this consumption actually goes up for children when milk is available indicates that availability and pricing is likely an issue for the low consumption of milk by children. So the fasting matters, but this availability and affordability are important impediments to increase dairy consumption in Ethiopia. So further investments in the dairy sector are needed. Nonetheless, there is a small number of children that participates in the fast, 5%, so some awareness creation is needed. And then to smoothen the effects of the demand swings due to fasting, further efforts are needed towards enhancing processing practices, so UHT milk and powdered milk that can more easily be stored would be helpful. And then improving transportation and chilling facilities to assure better market integration would help. We see that these households that are better connected, they are actually less affected by these fasting periods because they can ship their dairy products to areas where there is less adherence to fasting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bart, for sticking to time. The next presentation is by Yetmurk Hapte, who is the research officer at Ethiopian Research Support Program and the Policy Studies Institute. And her theme is food safety, modernization and food prices, evidence from milk in Ethiopia. Yetmurk, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alemayo. I'm going to present on food safety, modernization and prices in the case of milk value chain in Ethiopia. This is a work by Bart Minton, Kala Bayo, myself included. Next slide, please. To start with the introduction, assuring food safety is an important challenge that has been taking attention in most developing countries, typically with the milk value chain, given its perishability and incentive for adulteration, because milk is relatively expensive and cost of assessing its adulteration is very difficult. So to solve these issues, modern processing and marketing arrangements have been implemented. However, there is few evidence how these modern arrangements perform, especially during their early stage of rollout. So the purpose of our study is to answer this issue in the case of milk value chain in Ethiopia, and we particularly focus on answering the following 3 questions. One is whether modern processing companies are linked to the adoption of improved hygiene practice. And the second, does improved practice rewarded? Are they reflected in price? And third, we assess the role of modern retail in the process. So next slide, please. This next slide is about the data, and we conducted a survey in the year 2018, and we interviewed 955 dairy producers supplying to the city of Addis Ababa, and Since we are interested in assessing the modern as well as traditional value chains, we asked farmers to whom they normally sell their milk. So in our analysis, those producers who normally sell their milk to agents or trader or processing companies are categorized under the suppliers to the modern value chain, while the rest are included under are considered as a supplier to the traditional value chain. We also visited 208 retail outlets in Addis Ababa selling liquid milk, and we, like in the case of producers, we categorize them under modern and traditional. Modern retail outlets are actually those outlets who provide self-service and have at least one VAT machine. Next slide, please. The next slide is our finding on the adoption of hygienic practice, testing and milk handling by the modern value chain supplier versus the traditional value chain suppliers. And the left-hand side of the graph is some practice of hygiene. Some hygienic practice adopted by these two value chains. It's about whether udders and teats are cleaned before milking, whether milks are stored in the fridge. As you can see from the left side of the graph, the incidence of storage in the fridge is very small, so it's very important to see whether producers are putting evening and morning milk together, because the typical time, number of milking is twice. And we also see if farmers differently use when milk, we use the milk when cows are actually sick. So from the left side of the graph, we can see that modern value chain suppliers are not doing better as compared to the traditional. In fact, the adoption rate of this improved practice, so there is no difference between the two channels. But when we come to the right-hand side of the graph, we see the right-hand side of the graph, we see that quality testing, milk testing is widely practiced in the modern value chain. The red bar is about the modern value chain. So there are two mechanisms of testing. One is lactometers, which is widely used for adulteration, checking adulteration, while the alcohol test measures the sourness or acidity level of the milk. So these are the two widely practiced testing systems in the modern value chain, and the percentage is very high compared to the traditional value. Then another thing is using modified or improved container, which is highly supplied in the case of modern value chain by the buyers compared to the traditional, even though farmers themselves may not have these containers. So from the right-hand side of the graph, we can see that even though we don't have actual data on the quality difference in the milk between the two channels, we can see that with the widely practiced test and high rate of rejection of milk, we see that relatively the modern value chain supplies better and safer milk compared to the traditional, at least for the characteristics measured using these two mechanisms. The next slide, next please, is about whether there is a reward or a premium for farmers involved in the modernization process as compared to the traditional suppliers. And this graph is a price for modern versus the traditional milk value price at the producer level. And as you can see, the red line, which is the price for modern suppliers, is generally lower compared to the modern. In the next slide, even though there is no direct reward, given for the adoption of improved practice in the modern value chain, we can see that buyers in the modern value chain actually gives more service in terms of advice in better milk production and handling, and also continue buying milk during the fasting season. As Bart mentioned, fasting season is very important in the milk value chain, and these modern buyers in the modern value chain also gives a number of services in terms of availing credit, feed and storage, as well as veterinary service. So the incidence is small. So in all of these cases, we see that the modern do better than the traditional, indicating that even though there is no direct reward, there is an price mechanism that is being in place to bind buyers to the producers in modern value chain. Next slide is we will see whether there is a reward at the urban retail level. And this graph shows the price for modern pasteurized milk versus raw milk in the urban retail market. As you can see, there is a significant overlap between the two, and we see a small difference in price where the pasteurized receives higher price compared to the traditional. But when we control other factors like the type of retail outlet, fasting season dummy, and location, the price becomes similar, indicating there is no premium paid for pasteurization, packing, and branding at the urban retail level as well. And next slide is next, please, is about whether there is a price difference in modern retail versus traditional retail outlets. Those modern retail outlets do not charge higher price compared to traditional outlets. In fact, we found that the price at the modern retail outlet is 3% lower than the price at the traditional outlet. And this could be because of the fact that for 96% of the supermarket or modern retail outlets, we found that they get their milk supplied directly by the processing company, while for the traditional outlets, middlemen involved, like traders, are involving to supply their milk. So shorter value chain might play the role in this scenario. And next slide is about, I'm going to conclude, and we found that the adoption level of hygienic practice is generally low in Ethiopia. And we found also that there is no major difference between traditional and modern value chains, except that modern value chains do more formal testing than the traditional value chains. And we also found that there is no premium at the producer level for the adoption of improved practice. This also applies at the retail level, where there is no difference between branded pasteurized milk and raw milk. And at modern retail outlets, we also found that pasteurized milk is sold at a relatively small price compared to the traditional value. Traditional retail outlet. This could be possibly driven by short value chain, and the implication that the expansion of modern retail could, through IFPRI and linking them to the international companies, could lead to a safer milk at affordable price. And the whole finding, or this finding, suggested that for a wide adoption of hygienic practice and ensuring food safety to happen, the modern value chain should give more incentive, direct incentive to the actors involved. With this, I finish my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Etmurk. We quickly move to our next presentation by Agaje Tesfaye, who is a senior researcher at the Ethiopian Institute of Agricultural Research. The title of the presentation is The Quest for Safe Food, the COVID-19 Crisis and Dairy Value Chains in Ethiopia. Agaje, please. We can't hear you, Agaje.
Okay.
Now we
Now
can
you can hear me. Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Agaje Tesfaye from Ethiopian Institute of Agricultural Research, EIAR. I'm going to give you a short presentation on the title, The Quest for Safe Food, the COVID-19 crisis and the dairy value chains in Ethiopia. This was a joint work between EIAR and IFPRI. As you all, next please. Next slide. As you all remember, COVID-19 was declared existence in Ethiopia in around mid-March 2020. In around a month later, we came up with an idea to make a rapid assessment, qualitative assessment, to know how the dairy value chain is responding to this crisis, this COVID-19 pandemic. And we conducted a short qualitative appraisal with the purpose to understand the effect of the COVID-19 on the dairy sector, especially the value chains that supply the city of Addis Ababa. In order to collect the required information for this, we nearly interviewed about 100 key informants from various value chain actors along the milk value chain. We made telephone interviews and also face-to-face interviews to various value chain actors. Next, please. First of all, we tried to assess the effect of COVID-19 on the input chain, especially on the dairy feeds value chain. The findings indicate that the dairy feed chain was not noticeably affected by COVID-19 pandemic. This is because the large-scale concentrated feed processing companies had stocks of raw materials at the outset, at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. And also some of the dairy farmers which can afford to keep the stocks of feed, they have also kept some stocks of feed at the beginning of the pandemic because they were not sure of the they were not sure of the future. There was uncertainty on what will happen following the pandemic crisis. And apart from this, most of the dairy farms in the city of Addis Ababa faced no supply shortage. Even there was no significant price change on different feed products. And because of this, there was no noticeable effect on feed supply, demand, and prices, especially on dairy feed sector in the city. But there was only a slight price increment in suburban areas because of restricted transportation services in suburban areas that was declared by some regional governments. Next, please. The other aspect we investigated was the effect of COVID-19 on dairy labor. And we observed that there was no effect on dairy labor as well. This is because, as you know, most of the medium and small scale dairy farms depend on family labor in Ethiopia. And even those, the large scale commercial dairy farmers who depend on hired labor, there was no report of labor layoffs because of COVID-19. And because of these reasons, the effect of COVID was almost none on dairy labor sector. However, we have noted a very slight effect on veterinary medicine supply. The price of medicines was increased by 20%. This was because the veterinary medicines were mostly imported from outside. And at the time of COVID crisis in the world in general, there was an international supply chain interruption. Because of this, there was a slight price increment on veterinary medicines. Next, we have also observed the effect of COVID-19 on milk production. As we see from earlier slides, if the fish sector is not affected, and also the dairy labor is not affected, surely the milk production will also remain unaffected. Even the demand, the overall demand on the milk was not affected, and also the farm gate whole price milk, whole milk price was also unaffected. And because of this, the supply chain of milk was not also noticeably affected because of COVID-19 in the short run. Instead, what affected the supply side of milk was the fasting season. By the way, at the time of this study, we have made a distinction between whether the effect was because of fasting or whether it was because of COVID-19. So the information that we are presenting here are the effects that have been observed because of COVID-19 only. Next, please. Next slide. We have also seen the effect of COVID-19 on midstream value chains, especially on large scale and medium scale milk suppliers. When we say milk suppliers, we mean they are milk collectors who collect the milk from suburban dairy farms such as commercial and family dairies and supply to the city of Addis Ababa. These milk collectors supply in 100,000 liters of milk per day. And these milk collectors supply directly for milk processing companies, which process surface products. On this, the effect was only for a short period of time. There was a temporary disruption of milk demand at the beginning of the pandemic because of misinformation by mass media. The mass media advised the public not to drink any animal source food without making a distinction between which product is safe and which product is not safe. After recognizing this problem on the dairy sector, the mass media made corrections immediately and advised the public to keep on consuming safest products such as pasteurized milk and pasteurized yogurt and also powdered milk. But still, the media did not or does not advise to drink or to consume raw milk. And even because of that temporary disruption of demand, there was no price effect. Price remained unaffected at that time. And because of this, the COVID-19 pandemic has not much affected the milk collectors or the milk supply from out of Addis to the city of Addis Ababa in the short run. Next, please, next slide. This study has also made an assessment on the effects of milk supply by small-scale milk suppliers. What we have seen in the earlier slide was effect on large-scale and medium-scale milk suppliers. The small-scale milk collectors, they aggregate a small quantity of milk, like less than 5,000 liters per day, each of them, and they supply to different clients in the city of Addis Ababa. They supply to households, coffee houses, pastries, cafes, and restaurants. The effect of the COVID-19 was clearly seen on this segment of the value chain. House-to-house supplies was largely affected because of COVID-19, because the house-to-house clients, they were in fear that those milk distributors will spread the virus because they are in contact with many clients, many houses, and also they travel through public transport. So because of this, they did not renew the contract with these small-scale milk suppliers. And because of this, the small-scale, the house-to-house milk supply was somehow affected by COVID-19. The other effect was on those commercial service centers such as coffee houses, pastries, cafes, and restaurants. You see, they were also largely affected by COVID-19 because the customers were deserted from these service centers because of the stay-at-home and the physical distancing guidelines. Because the government advised the public to stay at home, or if they have to go out, to keep distance. And because of this, the number of customers who have been visiting the commercial service centers have substantially declined. And as a result, the whole milk demand was dropped by more than half, even to the extent of 70% in these commercial service centers. Overall, the whole milk supply to households and commercial service centers was adversely affected by COVID-19 pandemic because the raw milk was declared or advised to be unsafe by Ministry of Health and other institutions. Next, please. This study has also made an assessment of the effect on milk processing sector. The milk processing sectors basically process safest products, such as pasteurized milk and pasteurized yogurt. At the beginning, like the milk suppliers, they faced a temporary disruption of demand because of mass media misinformation, as I said earlier. After this, mass media made a correction immediately. The demand for these surface products came to normal cycle. Even the prices were not affected because the disruption lasted only for a week or not more than 2 weeks even. And because of this, there was only little impact on processing sector. Instead, it was the fasting season that affected the demand, the supplies, and the prices, as the earlier presenters mentioned. Next, please. Overall, we can say that what this study has discovered is the demand for unsafe products has declined. That means the demand for raw milk or whole milk and the demand for local yogurt that was prepared from raw milk was adversely affected by COVID-19. This is on the one. On the other hand, the demand for safest products has increased. That is the demand for pasteurized milk and the demand for pasteurized yogurt and even the demand for powdered milk has substantially increased in the COVID-19 season. In general, we observed a shift in demand from unsafe products to safest products. This means the dairy sector generally remains unaffected. Even the price of the safest products increased slightly, like the price of the pasteurized milk has increased by 7%, and also the price of powdered milk has largely increased by about 20%, because the demand has shifted from unsafe to safest products. Next, please. This study has also noted a shift in mode of consumption, not only a shift in demand, but also a shift in mode of consumption. You see, because of the stay-at-home and the physical distancing guidelines that was issued by the government, the clients, the customers have, most of them, they deserted the commercial service centers, such as the pastries and the restaurants and also the cafes. And because of this, there was a shift in mode of consumption from consumption in commercial service centers to consumption at home. The consumption didn't stop, but the consumers, they stayed at home, they continued consuming at home instead of consuming in commercial service centers. This is another new change that we observed because of COVID-19 crisis. In general, next slide, in general, in Ethiopia, the dairy sector has proven resilient in the face of the pandemic in the short run. It was not affected. Even though there was a shift in demand, the demand is still there. And also the mode of consumption, even though the consumption declines in commercial service centers, it is there at home. Because of this, overall, the dairy sector has remained unaffected by COVID-19. But this will only remain true in the short run. If the crisis of COVID-19 lasts for a longer period, for sure, the pandemic will start impacting the dairy sector negatively because the feed supplies will decline, because the raw materials, the supplies of raw materials will be declining because of shortage of adequate inputs, such as fertilizer and all those things. Because of this, we expect that the feed supplies will decline. And imports of the feed ingredients and also the veterinary medicines will decline. And even the imports of the powder milk will also be affected in the future. And above all, the very interesting thing is the purchasing power of the consumers will also decline because they are staying at home, they are not working. Even the lower income and the middle income will also minimize the purchasing of the dairy products. And because of this, the demand for milk products will start dropping. And following the decline in demand, we expect that the milk supply will also be reduced. So the government should make, and the development partners and the government and all actors should make corrective measures at the outset in order to minimize the long-term effect of COVID-19 on dairy sector. Thank you very much. This is what I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Agaje. We move to the next presentation, and this is by Liz Ignovsky. If I mispronounce your name, please correct me. She is from the University of Leuven in Belgium, and the topic is trade value chain technology and prices for dairy in East Africa. Liz, please.
Yes, thank you for the introduction. Hello, everybody. This is joint work with Bart Mitten, Bjorn van Kempenhout, Senna van der Velde, and Joost Winnen. And in this study, we explore the relationship of value chain technology on prices. Next slide, please. So we begin with a big picture quickly. On the left-hand side, we have the production and consumption of dairy products in both countries. And what we see is that both have been increasing over time. And we also see that both countries, actually, I should say that we're comparing Ethiopia and Uganda. I don't think that was stated. So yes, and both countries are producing more than they're consuming. But then when we take a look at the net exports, the right-hand side, we see a very different story. And in Uganda, they've really drastically increased their exports in the last decade, where Ethiopia is still a net importer of dairy products, and they face a large tariff on these imports. So this affects their price. And so in the study, we look at how these otherwise similar countries that have seen similar paths have really diverged in the dairy sector. Next slide, please. The data for this study from Ethiopia, it is the same data that some others have explained very well, so I won't go into too much detail, but we have information from farmers, traders, and retailers. And in Uganda, we have a very similar survey that was also collected in 2018 in the Central Milk Shed, which is north of Kampala. And we also have information from farmers, traders, and milk collection centers. And I will explain more about those in a moment. Next slide, please. So the value chain structure in each country varies, and this is a key aspect of this study. And so in Ethiopia, the traders actually go by truck along the main roads, and they pick up the milk from the farmers. So farmers have to walk, and in our study, it's about an hour of total travel time. So they walk to sell their milk to the trader, and then the trader takes it to the processor, and then eventually makes its way to the consumer. And as you can see, there's a couple different pathways. but I'm only going to discuss the most traditional or more modern value chain. In Uganda, this is a bit different. The traders are on motorcycles or bicycles, and they actually come directly to the farm gate. So the farmers don't have to waste any time trying to sell their milk. And then these traders, once they've reached their capacity with their milk cans, they go to a milk collection center. And this is the key innovation in the Ugandan value chain. These cooling centers collect, of course, the cat comes in. These cooling centers bulk the milk and chill the milk, and they are out in the rural villages, and Uganda's really increased the collection of these. And then the milk collection centers at the end of each day take this milk to the processor. And so this is a key technological advance in the Ugandan value chain that is helping them really innovate their value chain. And so what we want to study is, does this technology affect the prices, and how so in each country? Next slide, please. Just a quick descriptive slide on the prices of fresh milk in both of our countries. What you see is that in Uganda, the prices are much lower on average. Those are the gray bars on the right-hand side than the prices in Ethiopia. And you can see the margins between the farmers and trader in Ethiopia is quite small. And then the retail margin is much larger. In Uganda, we see the margin between the farmers and traders is slightly larger, but there's not much difference between the prices that the traders and the milk collection centers report. So we see this price difference, which we argue is due to the import and export status of each country. Because Ethiopia is still importing some dairy products, this is driving their price a bit higher, and Uganda is exporting dairy prices, so their price is a bit lower. And so we want to study, how does the technology within the country change this? Next slide, please. This is a price gradient for the price from farmers in each country. And once again, we see that big price difference between the two countries, with Ethiopia being the line on top and Uganda being the dashed line on the bottom. And on the x-axis, we have travel time in hours, and on the y-axis is the price per liter. In Ethiopia, this is the travel time to Addis, because the processing plants are in the city. And so what we find is that farmers closer to the city are receiving a higher price per liter, and with distance, this price declines. When you compare it to the farmers in Uganda, and first we're going to look at the smaller dashed line that's more on the right-hand side, and this is the distance from Ugandan farmers to Kampala. We see essentially a flat line. However, we are missing those farmers closer to the city center, so it could be argued that the graph would look similar to Ethiopia. However, given the technology in Uganda, it's really not about the distance to the city center, it's really about the distance to the chilling, because that's where the quality can be maintained. So the longer dashed line in the lower left corner is the distance from Ugandan farmers to their nearest MCC. And you see that most farmers live within an hour of an MCC. And once again, we see essentially a flat price. So the distance is not impacting the prices that the farmers receive in Uganda. And we also, in our study, have this in a regression analysis, and we find very similar results. Next slide, please. And this is a slight tangent. This is actually from another study, but given the importance of crossbred cow technology, we also wanted to include that today. So on the left-hand side, we have the adoption rate of crossbred cows in both countries. And we see, once again, a significant difference between the two countries. On the x-axis, we have the herd size by number of cows. And in Uganda, we don't see much variation. The adoption rate, no matter what the farm size, doesn't vary too much. It's about 40%. In Ethiopia, however, you see that the small farmers are about 40% adoption rate. And then as the farm size increases, so does their adoption rate. And so this indicates those small farmers don't have access to this technology, which is also just going to continue to hurt their production and their participation in the value chain. So then we asked ourselves why this might be the case, and we looked at the price of crossbred cows as reported by farmers in each country. And once again, we see a significant difference. And this is the graph on the right-hand side. In Uganda, the prices are essentially flat. All farmers reported very similar prices, around $1,500 US for a crossbred cow. In Ethiopia, we see quite a different story. The smaller farmers actually report a lower cost, and the price increases with farm size, which is very counterintuitive. And we argue that this is likely due to the quality of the crossbred cow. So those small farmers are facing a much higher price as compared to Ethiopia, or as compared to Uganda, but also they're not receiving the best quality technology. So it, again, is another hurdle that they face to improve their productivity. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, we've studied these two countries, and between the two countries, we've seen that there are some price differences, which are likely due to the trade position of each, one being an importer and one being an exporter. And then we also find, though, very different within country price differences, and we argue that this is due to the value chain structure and the use of modern technologies. And the technologies are mainly the milk collection center, so being able to chill the milk and maintain the quality, but also the use of motorcycles and bicycles by the traders who can reach the more remote farmers and allow the farmers not to have to take their time to transport their milk, and also the use of crossbred cows, which seem to be much more available to the farmers in Uganda as opposed to Ethiopia. So our main takeaways are that shorter value chains are not necessarily more efficient than longer ones, given such a product that is as perishable as milk, and that the use of technology can improve the milk quality and also reduce that impact of the remoteness of farmers and on the prices they receive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liz, for sticking to time as well. Our last presentation in this session is by Bjorn van Kampenhout, who is a research fellow at IFPRI. I'm sure I killed your name, so correct me. His team is leading the way, FDI and dairy value chain upgrading in Uganda. Bjorn, please.
Thank you, Alemaya. So this study is on modernizing dairy value chains in Uganda. This research was done together with Bart Minton and Joe Swinen. So it is about Uganda, but we hope that things can be learned also for the Ethiopian dairy supply chains. First slide, next slide, please. We started off this study from the observation that far-reaching liberalization policies and privatization of the National Dairy Corporation, which was the parastatal that was responsible for formal dairy processing up to 2006. So these two policy changes led to an influx of foreign direct investment in the subsector from about 2014 onwards. At the same time, we also found that the subsector witnessed a sharp increase in the demand, especially from abroad. And against this background, dairy value chains in Uganda have transformed significantly, resulting in a vibrant sector that is now the third most important export sector in the country. In this study, we just document the endogenous technological and institutional innovations that are both a cause and a consequence of modernizing value chains. We do this through observational data that was collected at different nodes of the value chain, and we will exploit the fact that one area modernized faster than the other area. So in a way, we will be comparing modern and traditional value chains similar to what Jatinborg did for Ethiopia just earlier. Yeah, next slide, please. So these figures illustrate the increase in demand I was talking about. On the left-hand side, you see local demand. For Uganda itself, it appears that most of the increase in the demand is driven by urban consumption, where consumption almost tripled over the last 10 years. So these figures are in liters per capita per year. So it went up from around 10 to more than 30. Consumption in rural areas, on the other hand, seems to be unaffected by the transformation over time with just a little bit of a zigzagging pattern. On the right-hand side, you see the massive increase really in the value of exports, in the value of dairy exports. Today, dairy has become the third most important export product in Uganda after coffee and fish, and it leaves the other traditional export commodities such as tea and flowers trailing behind. Uganda's dairy exports are now similar to those of South Africa, and Uganda is projected to become the continent's largest dairy exporter in the near future. Well, at least that was the projection at the time of the study, and that was before the dairy war, the dairy trade war with Kenya broke out, and also before the COVID-19 pandemic hit. Next slide, please. This next slide shows the study area. So Uganda is organized into different milk sheds. And as I said earlier, some milk sheds have been modernizing faster than other ones. For example, the Southwestern milk shed received substantial amounts of foreign direct investment, and that resulted in a modern export-oriented supply chain. The Central milk shed, which is basically the same area as from which Liz was using data, that milk shed produced similar amounts of milk than the Southwestern milk shed, but it is much more oriented towards local consumption. So this resulting modernization in two speeds, so to speak, will be used in our study to identify key innovations of the value chain, so to differentiate between modern value chains and traditional value chains. As Liz already said, we collected data from producer traders and milk collection centers. So we have a little bit more now because we added the Southwest to the data. We have a total of 1,600 dairy farmers, 700 small traders, and about 100 milk collection centers. We also talked to 2 processors, but that was more qualitative research. Next slide, please. We start at the most aggregate level, so at the level of the processors. And there we see that the increase in the number of large-scale processing plants is probably the most disruptive factor. As can be seen from this table, these processors export high-value products, particularly to neighboring countries, but some even export to countries as far away as the US and Japan. The ensuing increase in the demand for milk from these processors was an important pull factor for the supply chain innovations. And discussions that we had with the processors taught us that the market for milk is very competitive, and processors struggle to keep producing at full capacity. And this is particularly the case during the dry season. And as a result, we find significant seasonal price movements in the dairy sector. Next slide, please. Milk collection centers are very important. They are the ones that bulk and chill the raw milk, and they are also important links in modern. They are also important links in modern dairy value chains. They're basically the start of the cold chain. There are many more milk collection centers in areas characterized by modern supply chains, although we see from the figure that there are signs that the central milk shed is also catching up now. We find that particularly in modern supply chains, these milk collection centers often take the form of cooperatives, and that they do much more than simply collecting and bulking milk. They offer a range of midstream services, including provision of medicines against ticks, because tick fever is one of the main threats in the subsector. And they also supply milk cans to preserve milk sanitation levels. Next slide, please. Further upstream, we have the small transporters who assemble milk at the farm gate and transport it to milk collection centers. This is usually done by traders using small motorbikes or bicycles. At this level, the main innovation lies in the use of aluminum milk containers to preserve milk sanitation. As you can see from the table, the attention to milk sanitation cuts across the entire chain. However, the difference between the central milk shed and the southwestern milk shed is largest for traders and transporters. So from this, we conclude that, especially at the level of these traders, at the midstream, increased access to milk quality is important. Next slide, please. Finally, at the level of the producers, the main innovation we find there is related to adoption of yield improving technology, namely crossbred cows. In particular, while we see that the total number of animals is similar between the two sheds, in the southwestern modern milk shed, almost all of the animals are of an improved breed, while this is only half in the central milk shed. However, also here, the central region seems to be catching up quickly. Other innovations we document are controlled grazing instead of the traditional foraging. We also find that construction of dams is more widespread in the modern value chains to distribute water over the farm. And the use of credit and demand for trainings, often through cooperatives, also seems to be an important innovation at this level. Next slide, please. So from all this, we conclude that we find that milk collection centers are central, providing many of the support services that enable other actors in the supply chain to produce enough milk and to maintain milk sanitation levels necessary for an export sector to emerge. Still, we think that a dedicated service sector is needed for some of the services that are beyond the capacity of what milk collection centers can or should do. To also make sure that the sector stays competitive at the international level, complementary inputs such as packaging materials need to become also available at lower cost in Uganda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bjorn. We really ran out of time. We quickly move to a brief question and answer session. I invite all presenters to turn on their webcam and respond to at least one question per presenter. So let me start with Bart. And so there is one question, but there is, I would like to start by noting a comment from one of the participants, and that is the role of Ramadan and in dairy consumption should be studied. And I like Bart to comment on that briefly and answer the question: is there a gender dimension to fasting adherence, and are some fasting periods more practiced than others? Bart, please.
Yeah, with respect to gender, we actually found that women, when we did some econometric analysis, we found that women are actually doing a little bit less fasting than men, and that's likely linked to the fact that women are, when there is pregnancy involved, they are actually exempt from fasting, and that might lead to a little bit of reduction in fasting adherence. Then for fasting periods, so we found that we had identified 7 or 8 fasting periods over the year, and so it was especially the Lent fasting that was practiced by almost everybody. And then the Wednesday and Friday fasting was also something that most people would adhere to. Other fastings were relatively less important.
Thank you very much, Bart. I'll go to Sunishao next. And the question for Sunishao is, why is there variation in the share of crossbreed cows, presumably across farm types? Sunishao.
Okay, generally this is linked to some of the combination of the factors I mentioned during presentation. also, for example, there is variation in artificial insemination, which is a major component of getting crossbreed cows. I didn't present due to time, but we have these graphs that show significant variation across space and also across farm sizes. Artificial insemination sharply declines as we move away from Addis Ababa, and also there is also crossbreed cows are perceived to consume more per capita than the local cows, and we have studied that the most remote farmers are relatively poorer, and they may not afford to feed and take care of crossbreed cows. There is also a weather component, that there is a perception by the more remote farmers that crossbreed cows cannot withstand Ethiopian weather, so they have to be stored. There is also less access to crossbreed cows in more remote areas. This is my take on the question.
Thank you very much, Nishab. Moving on to Agaje now. The question for you is one second. So a participant observed that your results about the impact of the COVID-19 on the milk and the dairy sector contradicts many of the earlier findings, which state that COVID-19 affected milk consumption. Could you please briefly explain why the difference? Agaje. Can you unmute, please? Agaje.
It does.
Can you unmute?
Yeah.
We just start to hear you. Okay.
Yeah. The study says that there is a shift in consumption. The consumption did not decline. It declined in one sector, but it increased in another sector. For example, consumption declined in commercial service centers, such as pastries and cafes and restaurants, but it increased at home. So the overall net effect is still the same. It's unaffected. It's unaffected. It doesn't. The consumption is not declining because of COVID-19 in the short run, but in the long run, it declines. What the study is saying. The COVID-19 in the short run did not affect the consumption of milk and milk products. Overall, it only changes the demand from less surface products to more surface products, and also it changes consumption, mode of consumption from consuming in service sectors to consuming at home. That's why overall, when we remain unchanged. This is what the study is saying.
Thank you very much, Agaje. The next question is to Liz. Access to modern technology is costly for smallholder farmers. Is there any lessons that we can draw from Uganda's experience in terms of financing technology adoption? Liz.
Thank you. Yes, well, one major area is the crossbred cows that I briefly mentioned, and that dramatic price difference between the two. And one area, it seems that in Uganda, there's slightly more accessibility. Their AI or artificial insemination program was slightly more advanced in Ethiopia. So I think that's one potential way that the Ethiopian government could support having more crossbred cows. In terms of other technology, for the cooling technology for the value chain, another potential innovation would be, it's really the processors that could help improve the drive for these MCCs. Because in Uganda, some of them, while some are cooperative, there's also a lot of funding from the processors. And so once the processing sector grows, they will have a demand for more milk, and then because you can't build a milk collection center without a place for it to go. So I think it also has to come from that direction to help innovate a place where the farmers can bring in milk and a place where the quality can be maintained for those smallholder and remote farmers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now question for Bjorn. So milk chains differentiation by export orientation and local supply are based on policy action, or are there specific advantages which contributed for this specialization? Bjorn.
Yeah, so I think it's a bit of both. Obviously, while liberalization and privatization doesn't discriminate based on location, I think there are some policy considerations that may be at play here, specifically because the president comes from the Southwest, the area where most of the changes are happening. That said, I think there's also non-policy action related factors that are at play. The cost seems to be lower in the Southwest simply because the cows were there already. The people who live there, they are herders. They've been herders for since ages. And also they've seen, I mean, you know, the one thing brings the other, you know, it's an all endogenous projects. Lots of NGOs have also come in to support the sector in the Southwest. And then there's also these agglomeration effects when some processors are setting up their facilities there. Other processors will also come to that area because they can share some of the infrastructure. So I think it's a combination of the two, actually.
We really ran out of time. Before we close, I would say a few words by way of summary, conclusion, and then we will close. So we have a webinar that explored the livestock sector through value chain analysis, spanning production, marketing, and consumption. We observed clearly that it is a major source of livelihood, diet, and exports in this country, and it has a great potential yet to be fully realized. However, a lot has been happening in the sector in the last decade or so. Within production, output grew, but not productivity. We have limited modern inputs, modern production techniques, disease, and feed as the major constraints. We also heard that returns to modern production does not seem to be highly paying, is high enough for continued expansion. Regarding marketing, exports are declining. Commercial animal sourced food sector is growing and will grow much further in the next decade. Remoteness is a key determinant of market development, and modern processing and marketing still limited. With respect to consumption, we have heard that animal sourced foods have the potential to enrich household diet, but are expensive, and that is particularly true for the poor. Religion plays a role in the consumption of these animal sourced foods, but not as important as access and prices. There is also a need, it appears, for further analysis of the impact of the COVID pandemic, separating short run versus medium to long run. The takeaway regarding the way forward, particularly related to the experience of success in Uganda, we can divide we can focus on two major areas: modern technology and better institutions. There is a need clearly for significant investment in modern and appropriate technology, including artificial insemination, better breeds, extension and veterinary services, feed production, chilling centers, and better transport. In terms of institutions, cooperatives have to be promoted appropriately, and a great example given for case of Uganda are the multi-purpose milk collection centers. And there is also, of course, important tariff-related considerations that would promote the modern export dairy sector. That is the conclusion. Please note that we will put up the recording and presentations on the ESSP website, and we will also post the answers to all questions posed. On your behalf, I would like to thank all the presenters and close this webinar. Thank you very much.